Okay, so yes, part 2 of the Arasaka Corporation biography, whatever you want to call this. If you haven't watched part 1, honestly, what are you doing? Do you know who Sasai Arasaka is? Do you even know when Saburo took over the company? No? Man, go check out part 1. In this video, we will be discussing the Arasaka Corporation from the 2000s, possibly up until 2077. It all depends on what I can cover in this like 20 to 25 minute video. But before we go balls deep, I forgot to mention an important date of birth. Yorinobu was born September 1995, making him my younger brother, and Nisa to Hanako. I say his birthday is important because there would be no Cyberpunk 2077 video game without this man. Now, back to the Arasaka timeline. The new millennia. I was just old enough to remember Y2K, the crazy New Year celebration, and of course, a ton of war. Lots and lots of bad stuff in the early 2000s. On top of all this, the early 2000s was when Saburo's firstborn son, Kei Arasaka, took over the company as CEO. Don't get it mixed up though, Saburo was still the puppet master. He still held on tight to his ultimate goal of revenge for his country. Kind of like how this guy, after so many generations of one for all, he's still out there causing problems. Anyways, we must take pause here for a bit. Kei, like I mentioned before, is an extremely important character. Before being promoted, he was being groomed by his father to take over the company. And although we do not get a ton of info on Kei's upbringing, we already know enough. Since he was appointed as the next CEO, this means that Saburo must trust him enough to help him carry out his true plan. Again, like Mr. Nutsack and little Mr. Touchy Touchy. So Kei may not be as hateful as Saburo because he never experienced the bitter defeat of war. However, Kei certainly is ruthless, opportunistic, conniving, manipulative, and straight up evil, like his daddy. Aww. His character is just so interesting. I really do hope that he comes back somehow. I don't care if it's through the Relic program like his dad, or even if it's only in flashbacks. This character needs to make an appearance. The 2000s was also another kind of dry season, as in nothing crazy really happens. Major events include a contract for Arasaka Securities over in Slovenia, just showing that the company is literally a world-dominating force. In 2008, the company was hired by the Taiwanese government to help plan a defense against the Chinese government, which of course was sponsored by Militech. Hint hint, wink wink. Yes, senior year of high school, the Ice Bucket Challenge was becoming a thing. And let's not forget the Gangnam Style. 2010 was also another year of small skirmishes for Arasaka. This time they teamed up with WNS, World News Service. Yeah, you heard me right. They teamed up with a news broadcasting service to fight someone. I know, I find that weird, but let's not forget that reporters are actually a class in the tabletop version of Cyberpunk, so it kind of makes sense. They also teamed up with EBM, Euro Business Machines Corporation, a straight ripoff of IBM, WorldSat Communications Network, and the Triads in Hong Kong. All of them, they worked together to once again fight off China. Honestly, China is causing all sorts of problems, and it sounds like real life. Real politics is very mucky, so let's not get into that. This victory allowed Arasaka to establish a new regional office in the port city of Hong Kong. Nice! Then, on one fateful evening...
Changed my mind, lover. Look at you, all hot and bothered.
Johnny got stabbed. Oh man, they pissed off the wrong rocker boy. Silverhand already had a reputation for killing Arasaka executives. and now they stab him in the back and steal his girl. All joking aside, 2013 is a big year for Arasaka. Well, for the cyberpunk world in general. We already know that this was the first major incursion of Johnny Silverhand into the Arasaka Tower. It is also the year that Alt, quote unquote, dies. And I guess more importantly, we have to discuss how Arasaka gets a hold of Soulkiller. Yes, Alt does make it for them, but she doesn't do it willingly. I mean, duh, she's one of the good guys. Her options in that situation are don't make it and die, or make it and get soul killed. In this situation, she chooses the latter with an ulterior motive. She will make Soul Killer while also creating an escape plan. The only issue is Arasaka now has a template of Soul Killer. And one last thing, guys. Do not unplug people until you are for sure they are dead. Alt was actually still alive, but Johnny, being a drama queen, he was overwhelmed by what he was seeing, so he then unplugged his girl, leaving her stuck in the net. Good job, Johnny. So some cool things to dissect about this whole 2013 situation. First, let's talk about the fact that retrieving the Soul Killer virus, or program I should say, was something both Saburo and Kei wanted. Although the specifics were never clear about why they wanted it, but it is clear that Soul Killer is needed in order for the relic program to work. So, in my headcanon, let's just say they wanted Soul Killer for that reason. Regardless, it gave Arasaka a tool that is literally a fate worse than death, one that they would use in just a few years. Johnny is also one of the first people to really stick it to Arasaka in their international offices. Look, Arasaka at this point is acting megacorp evil. The source books don't really help in explaining just how bad. We get little snippets of things they do, but it's never fully explained. A lot of the evil they do is something we just kind of have to assume, along with this fact. Corporations are just plain bad in the world of cyberpunk. So for the most part, all companies are placed in this category of just selfish and evil. Oh baby, let's go lockdown. Okay, so obviously our real timeline and Cyberpunk's timeline don't exactly match. So no, there was no coronavirus in Cyberpunk's history, because that would be mind-blowing if, Mike Pondsmith and R. Talsorian somehow created a virus on the same year. That would be some like Illuminati conspiracy bullshit going on. Anyways, what you may know of is there was this mini nuke in Night City and something called the Fourth Corporate War. Some of you guys may be wondering, okay, you kind of skipped the first, second, and third Corpo Wars, broski. Well, to be honest, Arasaka did not partake in those events. So in actuality, there isn't much to talk about. But of course, I am working on a corporate war video, so make sure to subscribe and click that bell button so you don't miss out. For a while now, I have been alluding to the rivalry between Militech and Arasaka. If you've played the game, you know that they are rivals. You just know that these two companies have been going at it for years and years, and there is no better way to highlight this rivalry than the Fourth Corpo War. That way we get to fully flesh this rivalry out. You got Team Japan going with Arasaka and Uncle Sam picking Militech. Oh boy, this one is a ton of fun. So the year was 2021. Now, the Fourth Corpo War did not start as Arasaka versus Militech right away. It actually started as two oceanic corporations were fighting over the remnants of a third oceanic corporation. These two companies were Sino, Corporation Internationale Nauticale et Océanique. Oh yeah, that's right. E with that little tick on it, cause je parle français. And the other was OTEC, Ocean Technology and Energy Corp. These two not so friendly dudes were fighting for control of IHAG. And bear with me here, because I don't think I'll pronounce this name properly. Here we go. Internationale All right, easy. Handles Marine. Okay, honestly, that was easier than it first looked. It was a lot more intimidating. So we have International, Handles Marine, Akten Gesellschaft. I think this third company is German. So it's International Handles Marine Akten Gesellschaft. Things were, going the typical route. Okay, both companies were playing Monopoly. They were fighting over the resources of this third one, IHAG, that was going out of business. So like I mentioned, they were just playing Monopoly. So this is cool. This is fine. But then OTEC just had to do it. They called in Militech. So I mean, like, damn, at this point, they clearly had the upper hand. But then, of course, if one hires Militech, the other has to bring in Arasaka. Once the hiring of both companies happened, the fourth corporate war was now in full swing. And pause. Okay, damn, there's gonna be lots to talk about. And because I want to talk about the fourth corporate war in full detail, this is your heads up that the fourth corporate war / the Ocean War / the Shadow War / the Hot War, yeah, lots of names for this one, is going to be like, it's what's going to make the bulk of this video and pretty much what I'm going to be talking about the rest of the video. Even though this is a video that's supposed to be focused on Arasaka, at this point, I can't really continue telling the Arasaka story without talking about the war. So just sit back and enjoy the fight between these two heavyweights. All right, if you're still with me, thank you. Let's get going. First, we have to talk about the big bosses in charge of this whole fiasco. So let's talk about the Militech and OTEC's side of things. The CEO for OTEC was this lovely lady, Amanda Russell, and her bodyguards, Militech, was led by Willard Keaton. Understand that Militech's CEO and Arasaka's CEO, so Saburo, was not technically partaking in this event. So for Militech, they they put Willard Keaton in charge of providing security for OTEC. Now we got Sinnoh's CEO, so Peter Nicholas, who honestly might be an alien. As for his hired guns, Arasaka appointed Toshiro Hikaru to ensure that their contract is completed. So there you go. Those are the big bosses in charge of, everything unfolding. We all know at some point the Ocean Wars portion of the Fourth Corpo War, it ends. This means that OTEC and Sinnoh's conflict is pretty much over. Things are mitigated by the Eurobank. And like I mentioned, the reason why the bank is involved is because the war was starting to get a little messy politically and economically. So the Eurobank, in an effort to stop things from getting out of hand, made sure that they took control of IHAG's assets and started distributing it properly and accordingly between the two oceanic corporations. But Arasaka and Militech get super petty. The war again was supposed to be over, but not for them. At first, when they were hired, they had no hidden agenda. They were hired as security and paramilitary, and they just wanted to fulfill their contracts. Nothing bad with that, because by doing so, they get to show off their latest and greatest tech. Pretty much a way to advertise to other corpos to hire them if they ever need security or paramilitary. But things change real fast. I'll give you some examples from the source books, and I quote, "We accidentally killed that Arasaka advisor because he wasn't wearing his corporate colors. Sorry, but if Militech hadn't sent an AV to support the OTEC troops, we wouldn't have launched a missile at it. Hey, weren't those Arasaka markings on that gunboat? Oh well, too late now." Literally, that's the kind of thing and stuff that was happening all throughout the little skirmishes that they were encountering. I'm going to say it one more time. Both Arasaka and Militech were hired as security. They were meant to be protecting and not just attacking at random. So yeah, it becomes tit for tat. The only problem is both these companies are mega corps. So their actions cause economic and political messes. Yeah, you know, like how there's that Japanese proverb about how a tiny water drop can cause a tsunami way in the distance? Imagine that, but times 10. So like a meteor crashing and literally obliterating the planet. Now you guys are a little bit caught up with the Ocean Wars portion of the Fourth Corpo War. So I think it's important that we take a step back and talk a little bit about the Arasakas. In keeping up with the Arasaka soap opera, things aren't going all too well. A few years before the war, Yorinobu leaves the family, vowing to expose the evil of the company. If you guys haven't seen that video where I say Yorinobu's the good guy, go check out that video. Anyways, he creates the Ryu no Katetsu street gang. The family feud creates a massive rift, planting the seeds of a divided Arasaka, which we will talk about later. Because of Yorinobu's actions, Kei, the eldest son, vows to kill his younger brother. Guys, I'm telling you right now, we got lucky. Yorinobu was the one alive in Cyberpunk 2077 because Kei is straight up evil. Man wants to kill his own brother. Come on. And now let's go back into, like, I guess the war front, or not behind the scenes stuff. The Fourth Corpo War is now entering a stage called the Shadow War phase. This portion of the war takes place between November 2021 to February 2022. Now, I kind of gave it a date, but in reality, the Shadow Wars really takes place from like day one when Arasaka and Militech were hired. Literally from there, and I'll explain a little bit more in a second why. Okay, so some of you may be a little confused, you know, like how come these two companies all of a sudden got into it with each other? Well, remember they were hired to protect and secure their respective employees. Well, there were a few things that they each did that forced the other to up the ante. And we have to remember, Saburo is not going to lose to the Americans again. So that's where his pettiness is coming from. That is the reason why he is so driven in the first place. So it just doesn't make sense that he'll allow another American-based company or institution to beat him. So that's why he's that petty. Anyways, here are some key events that escalated the war. First, there was the death of one Hiraki Edono. This guy was in charge of Arasaka operations in the state of New York, but he was found dead. What's worse is he was also handling the Sinnoh security in that Atlantic area. This caused so much confusion on Arasaka's end, and as a result, they became suspicious that Militech had killed him. What's wrong with this? Well, Militech and Arasaka are not supposed to be killing each other, only protecting their employees. Arasaka felt that to get an upper hand, Militech assassinated Hiraki. Secondly, direct command tactics. Both Arasaka and Militech commanders insisted on leading battles. Although there was technically nothing wrong with this, the fact that they were doing so made the battles more and more personal. As in, oh, that was your idea to bomb our base. Well then, what if we destroy your fuel depot? So that's kind of why the tit for tat things started happening, because men on Arasaka's side and Militech's side wanted to take charge of things. And if you lose, you kind of take that personally. It's kind of like a war thing. So that's another reason why things escalated. Thirdly, the hiring of Morgan Blackhand by Militech. You guys remember in the beginning when I said Willard Keaton for Militech? He was the man in charge of the operation. Literally a few months later, they hire Morgan Blackhand. And I'm sure at this point, everyone has an idea who this guy is. Morgan Blackhand is the legend of legends, ranked as the #1 solo, beating out guys like Andrew Boa Boa Wayland, Shaitan, and even Adam Smasher. Once Militech hired someone as notorious as Morgan Blackhand, this gave way for Arasaka to once again up the ante. It's not clear how, but I'm going to make the assumption that allowing, I don't know, someone named Adam Smasher to take part had something to do with it. Side note, I really like Adam Smasher versus Morgan Blackhand. So for sure, I'm going to make a video pitting them against one another. But yeah, so those three things that happened in the beginning of the Fourth Corpo War are the things that pushed both megacorps to the edge. The Shadow War, if anything, was like the prep for the bigger war to come. Pieces were being placed, assets gathered by both sides, and smaller skirmishes were taking place. The Shadow War, if anything, highlights how petty Saburo and Kei Arasaka are. Another thing to consider is, had a non-American company been the security that was hired, would Arasaka be so petty? Because we have to look at this in a more metaphorical perspective. Saburo wanted revenge for his country, and if he surrendered again to Americans, that honestly might just kill the old guy. I'm willing to bet that his pride would not have been able to handle that kind of defeat. However, if another company like Kang Tao was hired, he may have been more willing to let it all go. Obviously, it didn't happen, but this is just something I want you guys to think about. Now, at this point, again, I've probably said so many things, mentioned so many facts, and I want you guys to, I guess not get lost. And to better understand what was happening, let's go over a brief timeline. And in this timeline, I am going to dodge the obvious stuff, like all the back and forth raids Arasaka and Militech did to one another, and just highlight like key events. So let's start off with January 2022. Morgan Blackhand is signed as acting director of OTEC Securities. February 2022. Eurobank steps in and tries to stop the fighting between OTEC and Sinnoh by holding all the IHAG assets. It did not work at first. In the same month, a raid conducted by Sinnoh takes place, one that would see heavy losses for Militech and OTEC side. Later in February, peace talks between OTEC and Sinnoh take place. The two oceanic companies would eventually come to a peace agreement, and a treaty was signed in Paris on February 27, 2022. The only reason why they decided to have peace talks was because there was just too much bloodshed at this point, and it wasn't enough to justify or validate what they were trying to get, which was all the assets of IHAG. So they felt that it was a little too much. The war honestly should have been over, but like I mentioned, the Shadow War had already taken place behind the scenes. Mere days later, Arasaka completed Soul Killer 2.5, a revamped version of the one alt created in 2012, and you better believe they were going to use it. On March 6th, the program was used on a mid-level Militech executive. He died as his mind was being transferred. The following day, March 7, data raids on Militech's Night City servers take place. And here's the crazy part. The passwords were taken from the deceased Militech executive. Honestly, Arasaka is just ruthless. These data raids then forced Militech to contact a person named Reish Bartmas, literally my favorite character at this point. But because of his hatred of any and every corporation, he refuses to help. Militech then contacts Alt, who is now in the net. Remember, at this point, she is physically dead and now only lives in the net. She agrees because she wants to destroy Soul Killer, which makes sense because she never wanted Arasaka to have Soul Killer in the first place. Anyways, because of her relationship with Reish, they were friends and not any of that dirty stuff, she convinces him to join her on the condition that Militech does not interfere with his work. Guys, time out. Take this in, okay? Morgan Blackhand, world-renowned solo. Altira Cunningham, the woman who created Soul Killer. And Reish Bartmas, the netrunner who would eventually destroy the net, becoming the most wanted man in the world, teaming up. Holy shit. And of course, let's not forget Johnny, Rogue, Shaitan, and Spider Murphy, who will join this all-star squad in the now infamous Night City Holocaust. What just happened? During the Hot War, everyone gets dragged in, and I mean everyone. The economy gets messed up, politics are thrown out the window, and things get super ugly. So eventually the governments kind of had enough. They felt that they needed to step in, and I honestly think they should have stepped in sooner. And again, another kind of interesting point to consider. Megacorps are so big that governments are actually, well, not scared, but they're reluctant to step in because the paramilitary both Arasaka and Militech have is enough to challenge that of the respective countries. So Arasaka is big enough. Well, honestly, Arasaka is big enough to take over the whole Japanese government. Certain things stop them from doing so, but yeah, that's a thing that they are able to do. Militech, again, has the firepower to literally blow up the rest of the United States. So again, it's just kind of crazy how governments are reluctant to, but were forced to. So on October 28, 2022, government intervention increases. A few weeks prior to this, or sometime around September, the Japanese government nationalizes Arasaka assets and tries to negotiate a deal with them to stop the war. But come on, look at this guy's face, okay? Now look at his son's face. You think they're gonna stop? Nope. On that note, let's talk about the Arasaka family members and what they were doing during this war. So kind of like, let's go from the war back to behind the scenes stuff. Obviously, Saburo and Kei were very involved in the war, actively moving to places around the world to oversee their programs. One in particular was the Soul Killer program. So Kei was very much involved in improving it and pushing the program forward. So he was, I think for the most part, usually in Night City. So then what about Yorinobu? Well, the rebellious son was doing his best to thwart the efforts of his dad and his older brother. Although he never joined Militech's side, even though they tried to recruit him, he was feeding information to the Japanese government to try and stop the war. The reason why Japan was actually able to nationalize Arasaka assets is because of Yorinobu. He fed them enough information that they were able to take hold of Arasaka assets to try and, again, stop the war. Hanako at this point, honestly, she was not that involved. She was in constant protection as the war raged on. All right, this is a story we've all heard before. Johnny and company attack the Arasaka Tower and detonate a mini nuke, killing thousands. Is it millions or thousands? I don't quite remember. There's a lot of people. The nuking of the tower signals the end of the war. Even though officially the Fourth Corpo War ends like 2 years later, the attack at the towers was really the white flag reluctantly being waved. The result of this was catastrophic for Arasaka. Arasaka was now forced to be a Japan-only corporation for at least a decade. This happened because President Kress, the US president at this time, blamed the nuking on Arasaka, even though many in the public knew it was Militech's doing. So think of all the progression and everything Saburo had done throughout the years. It's now been halted because now he's stuck. He's forced to just only play in Japan for at least a decade. I think that's what the treaty, or the forced treaty that was signed by them, states. So yeah, there's that. Also, it's interesting to note here that the president of the United States, President Kress, is pretty corrupt. So like I mentioned, she blames the nuking on Arasaka, which is kind of weird because it's their own tower, but it's never really fully fleshed out or explained how. They just made it obvious in the public that it was Arasaka's fault, and that's why so many people died in Night City. Again, even though Militech knew even though a lot of people knew it was Militech's doing. This brings up another point. The US government is just disgusting. They use this attack as a way to gain ground. First, as mentioned, they forced Arasaka out of the US, which is a good thing for them. And secondly, because they knew Militech was involved and straight up blamed Arasaka, Militech was pretty much blackmailed by the US government to become their military. So of course the US government has their own military, but now Militech is kind of under their fingernail as well. And of course, we have the death of Johnny Silverhand and possibly Shaitan's death. This was also the last time Morgan Blackhand was publicly seen. that rift that I was talking about when Yorinobu first left is still being felt now. With Kei, the true heir to the Arasaka throne, dead, factions form, like I guess formally, within Arasaka. We got Taka, or the Hawk faction, headed by Yorinobu himself, the Kiji, or Green Pheasant, headed by Hanako, and the Hato, or Dove faction, headed by Michiko Arasaka, Kei's daughter. And that is, again, there was a lot of information here. This is probably the most talking I've done in a video. I'm gonna try and put timestamps. I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna try. But yeah, so the fourth Corpo War was just a big mess and a big portion in Arasaka's history. It may have seemed that I wasn't really talking from Arasaka's perspective, but in reality, there wasn't much we can say besides the fact that Sapporo was being petty the whole time, and he could have stopped the war. He was in that position of power. So was Kei, but they let something like his, like, you know, they let something like his own death really to, you know, decide that, okay, this is too much. Where in reality, had they done that sooner, they may have incurred less losses. Kei could definitely be alive now. But yeah, so it's just too bad. And again, I tried my best to kind of tell you guys what was going on behind the scene with Arasaka's family. But again, really, they weren't doing much besides Yorinobu kind of scheming in the background. Like I mentioned, he gets brought back into the family, and yeah, this brings us, I guess, to like the 2030s up to the 2077, which is the game. So I'll definitely do that in the next video. I don't think it's going to be as long. So thank you guys for everyone who has watched, and if you stay tuned for the whole thing, again guys, thank you so much, and I will definitely be seeing you in the next one. Bye.